Good evening, adventurers. Going over the S spells in the Player's Handbook 2024 today. There are a lot, so buckle in and get started with a fan favorite in the new rule set, Searing Smite. Searing Smite now lights targets on fire, which it used to do, but it does its damage on their turn before the saving throw, so it's guaranteed at least one extra hit of damage now. It's also a prompted bonus action when we hit a creature with a weapon attack, instead of using our bonus action before. It also doesn't require concentration anymore because of that, meaning we have the potential to light multiple creatures on fire, and we can use the spell even if we're concentrating on something else. Upcasting the spell also increases both the initial damage when we hit a creature and the fire damage they take turn after turn until they succeed that saving throw. Sending is now divination instead of evocation. Personally, I was surprised to learn that that wasn't already the case. Maybe that's just me. The spell now has a duration of instantaneous instead of 1 round, meaning that the target creature can now take more than 6 seconds to respond if they want. It's up to the DM what immediately means when responding. The target creature also doesn't have to have a specific amount of intelligence, which means technically if you cast Sending and target a creature that has 0 intelligence, they understand your message now. The caster now knows if their message wasn't received. Basically, if the target was on a different plane of existence, there's that 5% chance that the message will fail. Casters now know when that happens. And the target can now block the caster for 8 hours if they receive a message they don't want, which I find hilarious and also probably a good thing for their own sanity. Shape Change, one of my favorite level 9 spells, personally speaking, now adds temporary hit points to the caster instead of replacing the caster's hit points with the HP of the creature they're transforming into. The spell ends early if temporary hit points reach 0, although as far as I can tell you can replace the ones from the spell if they're getting low, so you can prolong the spell a bit that way. This is especially relevant because if you transform using a magic action into a different creature, you get the temporary hit points equal to their HP. It used to be capped in the old version at whatever HP you were from the first creature. You couldn't go over that HP transforming again. That clause is gone. So, it seems like we can transform into something with, say, 150 HP, and then later transform into something with 200 HP, and get that extra 50 temp HP. That also seems to mean that if your temps are getting low, you can just transform into a different creature and replenish them. This is crazy strong, and I would love to be corrected if I am wrong, but that seems to be the way it's written. That aside, the caster also now keeps their own creature type, so if you're an elven wizard, you still remain a humanoid regardless of what you transform into. Relevant for spells like Hold Person, I suppose, probably not a big deal in most cases. And the caster no longer keeps their other features from their class, subclass, or species other than spellcasting. Shatter has gotten a minor buff in that all constructs now have disadvantage on the saving throw against it, not just creatures made of stone, metal, or crystal, etc. Mineral type materials. Now, regardless of what they're made of, constructs have disadvantage, even if they're, say, a flesh golem. Shillelagh allows the caster to deal force damage with their weapon, and increases the damage of it to a d10 at level 5, d12 at level 11, and 2d6, which seems like kind of a lateral move to me, at 17. Shining Smite, which was formerly known as Vanishing Smite, and I did touch on it in my B video because of that, now highlights the target like sort of a single target fairy fire so that the attacker and everyone who attacks that creature now has advantage on their attack rolls. The spell is Transmutation instead of Evocation now, and it is a prompted bonus action like the other Smite spells. Shocking Grasp has gotten a bit of a downgrade in that it no longer gets advantage against creatures wearing metal armor. Sad. It also doesn't take away a creature's reaction per se, it prevents a creature from making opportunity attacks. So that creature can still do things like cast Shield, or Counterspell, or use a parry reaction, something like that. Simulacrum is a complicated spell, and it comes with complicated changes. The Simulacrum itself can no longer cast the spell Simulacrum, for one thing. It can now only be healed by repairing it during a long rest. The old version of the spell didn't technically specify that was the only way to do it. The spell doesn't explicitly state that the construct can't get spell slots back, can't level up, can't become stronger, can't gain class features, any of that stuff. But that is largely covered by two things. One, the sim cannot take short or long rests anymore. And 2, the Simulacrum uses the stats of the creature at the time of casting. Sleep no longer involves rolling a bunch of d8s and affecting that many HP worth of creatures, which is good if you're above level like 2. Spell used to fall off very quickly as enemies start getting more HP. Now it doesn't, because it just uses saving throws like a normal spell. It uses 2 saving throws, the first incapacitates targets, and the second, which happens at the end of a target's turn, fully knocks them unconscious. The radius has been reduced from 20 feet to 5 feet, which is a huge downgrade. The sleep spell no longer interacts with the charmed condition at all. Now, instead, creatures who are immune to the exhaustion condition and who don't sleep naturally, like elves and most undead and constructs, are considered to automatically succeed on their saving throws against the spell. Sleetstorm has had a weird change in that the dimensions of its cylinder have been swapped. Now instead of a 40-foot radius, 20-foot high cylinder, it is a 20-foot radius, 40 feet high cylinder. And I don't know if that was intentional on the developer's part, or if they got some numbers mixed up. In any case, it's a smaller AoE now. It's a bit unfortunate, but it is what it is. The other change is that the 2 effects of knocking creatures prone and causing them to lose concentration on any spells they're holding is now 1 effect with 1 dexterity saving throw. If they fail, they are knocked prone and lose concentration. If they succeed, nothing happens. Slow no longer slows down the casting of spells, causing them to take effect on the next turn for the creature. Now, there's simply a 25% chance that any spell cast with a somatic component fails. There's a new cantrip on the block, and it's called Sorcerous Burst. It lets the caster choose their damage type from the elemental damage types Psychic and Poison. It's also a sorcerer-only spell and does not appear on any other spell lists. It deals 1d8 of the chosen damage types, scaling at levels 5, 11, and 17, of course, gaining a die each time. It also can gain damage if any of the damage on its dice rolls an 8. This is a little more likely to happen on a critical hit, or if we have ways to add d8s to the damage. The amount of extra d8s that can be rolled is equal to the caster's spellcasting ability modifier, most likely charisma, as it is a sorcerer spell, like I said. The spell also works great with features that allow us to re-roll damage, like empowered spell metamagic, for example, and features that maximize damage dice, like the Tempest Cleric's Channel Divinity Destructive Wrath. Spare the Dying now has a range greater than touch. It starts at 15 feet and doubles at level 5 to 30 feet, doubles again at 11 to 60 feet, and doubles a third time at 17 to 120 feet. Useful if you want to stabilize creatures that are beyond your normal movement range, or if you simply don't want to move to them. The spell used to be perfectly on par with a healer's kit, and therefore useless because you can just buy a healer's kit. But now, it actually has some range to it, and that's useful. Speak with Plants has removed the line about releasing entangled creatures, although that could ostensibly still be done, as plants are directed or can be directed to move their branches, stalks, tendrils, etc. as you direct. Spider Climb now benefits from upcasting by gaining an additional target for every spell level above 2nd. Spike Growth has always had a clause where creatures who don't see the spell's area when the spell is cast have to make an investigation check to determine that the spikes are there. Now the spell specifies that check must be made as part of a search action. Didn't actually say it takes an action before, now it does. If you're in the middle of fighting people, most of the time they aren't going to take an action to investigate the floor, so this is actually a pretty big bonus. Spirit Guardians now deals its damage when a creature enters its emanation or ends its turn there, instead of starting the turn there, or when the emanation moves into a creature's space. This is the same with a lot of these sort of persistent AoEs that can move, and is definitely a glow up for Spirit Guardians, because you can now have the spell active and run around the battlefield. You can use dash actions if you want to, teleport around with Misty Step, etc., and just generally mess up a whole bunch of enemies' days. Also, for whatever reason, the material component of the spell changed, so it is now a prayer scroll, which I am pointing out as interesting because that's also the material component for Shield of Faith. So if you have a prayer scroll, you can cast either of these spells. Spiritual Weapon now requires concentration, and I know a whole lot of people are disappointed about that. It is pretty unfortunate. It's been a classic in the cleric's toolbox for a long time to throw one out at the start of combat and then cast other things like Spirit Guardians. You can no longer do that because it does require concentration. On the plus side, it does now gain 1d8 of damage for every level above second instead of every other level, which means it is stronger. Staggering Smite is now enchantment instead of evocation. It is a prompted bonus action instead of requiring a bonus action to cast before swinging your weapon. It now applies the stunned condition until the end of the caster's next turn, and it does not require concentration. It also gains a bonus from upcasting by adding 1d6 per spell level, which isn't a lot, but at least you get something. There's another new cantrip called Starry Wisp. This deals 1d8 radiant damage, scaling as cantrips do, of course, has a range of 60 feet, and uses an attack roll. And when we hit a creature with it, that target is illuminated in dim light until the end of our next turn, and can't benefit from the invisible condition. So if we're fighting something like an invisible stalker or any caster that casts invisibility, just hit him with Starry Wisp and we can see him again. Steel Wind Strike is a very cool spell from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and it is reprinted in the new player's handbook. It has only one very minor change, and that's that the word can was removed. So now when we teleport around and hit a bunch of creatures, we have to end up next to one of them. It's no longer optional. Stinking Cloud does not wrap around corners anymore. That is very normal for these sphere AoEs in this version of the game, and it doesn't exempt creatures that don't need to breathe anymore. Stone Skin is now Transmutation instead of Abjuration, and it confers resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, where it used to say non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. Non-magical damage has pretty much been eliminated in the new version of the game. Most things do not care about that kind of thing anymore, so it makes a lot of sense that Stone Skin also would not. Storm of Vengeance now has a cloud radius of 300 feet instead of 360 feet, so a little bit of a debuff there, although 300 foot radius is going to cover most battlefields no problem. Range is no longer sight, but is now 1 mile, which is still plenty far for most uses, and creatures affected by the deafening thunderclap at the start of the spell are now affected for only the duration of the spell rather than 5 minutes. The acid rain that happens on turn 2 is now 4d6 of acid damage, up from 1d6, so that's a bit of a glow up as well. Suggestion now applies the charmed condition to the target, and is now limited to 25 words or less rather than a sentence or two, whatever that means. Suggestions now fail if they would obviously cause damage to the target or any of its allies, rather than being limited by what the DM considers a reasonable suggestion. So it's better to have a hard line on that, for sure. Now into the summon spells. There are a ton of these. Most of them are from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Actually, all but one of them are, and I'll get to that. Summon Aberration now has a Mind Flayer variant instead of a Star Spawn one. In any case, its abilities are the same, except that the Whispering Aura now exempts the caster of the spell from its damage, but not other allies, so you still gotta be careful. Summon Celestial has gotten a little bit of a buff in that the Avenger Angel's longbow attack no longer has a short and long range, meaning that it does not have disadvantage on attacks up to the full 600 feet. For Summon Construct, the construct itself is no longer immune to the incapacitated and petrified conditions, even if it's already made of stone. Heated Body now deals damage at the start of a creature's turn if it is in a grapple with the construct, whether the construct is the grappler or the grapple-e. And Stony Lethargy takes away a creature's opportunity attacks, not its full reaction, much like Shocking Grasp. Summon Dragon, which is the one in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, though it's called Summon Draconic Spirit for whatever that's worth, functions the same but no longer has the Gem Dragon options. For Summon Elemental, the Elemental is no longer immune to the unconscious condition, and the slam attacks dealt by the air version of the Elemental now deal lightning damage, and the water variant deals cold damage, both instead of bludgeoning. Summon Fae. The Fae now has a fly speed of 30 feet, though its normal speed has also been reduced to 30 feet from 40 feet, and the Fae Blade attack deals all force damage, though the amount of damage overall has not changed. For Summon Fiend, the Devil variant's fire attack can now be ranged or melee instead of only ranged, which is nice if something runs up within 5 feet of it. Summon Shadow Spawn is curiously absent from this book. I normally don't mention things that weren't printed in the new book, but I wanted to point this one out as it is the only summon spell that wasn't. I don't know why that is, but if you want to cast that, or your players want to cast that, just use the one in Tasha's. And Summon Undead. The ghostly variant's Deathly Touch attack now inflicts the Frightened condition without a saving throw, and the Putrid version's Rotting Touch attack inflicts the Paralyzed condition on creatures it hits that are poisoned already, also without a saving throw. Sunbeam has been nerfed a little bit in that Undead and Oozes no longer have disadvantage on the saving throw. The rest of the spell works the same as it always has, though. Same thing with Sunburst. Undead and Oozes no longer have disadvantage on the saving throw. I'm not really sure why they took those away from both these spells, but it is what it is. Swift Quiver, finally, allows the caster to make 2 attacks with their weapon as the same bonus action that they use to cast the spell, meaning they don't have to cast it and then wait around to actually make use of it. Huge. It's a change I've wanted for the spell for a long time, and it's great to see that it happened. Symbol has been reprinted, although it lacks 2 of the options for the symbol's effects, those being the Hopelessness and Insanity effects. And last but not least, finally, Synaptic Static. A spell originally printed in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, it no longer has an intelligence requirement for targets and will affect everyone just the same. That was a lot, but we got through it. That is all of the S spells printed in the new Player's Handbook that have changed, or are new, from their original version. Thank you so much for watching, all the way through to the end if you made it here. I appreciate any liking and subscribing that y'all do. It helps the channel out, it really does. And I'll see you in the next one for the T spells. I'm pretty sure that's what comes after S. My brain's a little fried, and I will see you next time. What even are outros? I don't even know. Happy adventuring.